we can talk about a lot of different scenarios. I think the most likely right now is kind of looking at this from the perspective of we have these sneak previews for 3 days leading into a Thursday nationwide release that will still be missing several major markets. So you really could not have a more non-traditional opening for a major film in the United States.
This is the Box Office Podcast. My name is Russ Fisher. I'm the editorial director of the Box Office Studios, which provides editorial content to movie theaters. And with me, as always, are Daniel Laria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, and Rebecca Pauley, the deputy editor of Box Office Pro. Great to talk to both of you again.
And coming to you live on a Thursday now. This is exciting.
That's right.
On like Tenet
This is our first Thursday episode.
Yeah.
on the long-awaited Tenet U.S. opening Thursday. As we mentioned last week, we're moving our schedule to Thursdays rather than Mondays, and a big part of that is because movie theaters in the U.S. are open again in many states, and so we will have weekend box office forecasting courtesy of Shawn Robbins. He'll be on towards the end of this episode. And that means that we also have news to talk about. So we're going to jump right in with a little rundown of what happened this past weekend, which begins, of course, with Tenet opening internationally, and it opened to 53 million, which, considering that we're not at 100%, seems pretty good.
Yeah, really positive news coming out from overseas. Looking at an actual gross of 53.6 to be specific here from Warner Brothers. Top markets for Tenet. UK leading the way, its home market with $7 million in its opening weekend, followed by France with $6.8 million. In third place, we've got South Korea with 5.1 million, and then Germany with 4.5 million for that opening share. In a context of two things to keep in mind, of course, right? One, pent-up demand for new titles like this one, of course, is going to bring more people out than usual. But a global pandemic and restrictions to capacity for cinemas is probably going to hold some audiences back. So as we've been saying for a number of weeks, it's a promising start, but this is far from the usual opening day weekend numbers that we've come to expect.
I think you're leaving something out. There's an important third factor, which is that international movie star Tom Cruise posted a video of himself at the Tenet UK premiere. And I mean, maybe it's just me, but I want to say that drove a couple of $1 million worth of box office easily.
I love my Tom Cruise.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big Tom Cruise fan to a certain extent. I shouldn't even say that. I've seen like maybe 8 of his movies. And I think...
8?
Yeah, I know. But Eyes Wide Shut's great. I like Eyes Wide Shut. Does that count? Is that even a Tom Cruise movie, or is that with like Magnolia
I wouldn't
in some
consider
corner?
that a Tom Cruise movie.
That's a Kubrick movie.
He's a very charismatic man. I liked the display of cross studio solidarity given his I mean, I guess the most prominent movie he has coming out is Top Gun Maverick, which is a Paramount film. Obviously.
And he's working on Mission Impossible, which is also a Paramount movie. And I think, in fact, at that video, he was at the premiere seated next to Christopher McQuarrie, who they've partnered on many movies together now, including the last couple and the next couple Mission Impossible movies.
It was a good video to see it. And we've seen a bit of that over in the French market with French, prominent directors and stars coming out in support of the theaters, but we haven't seen it so much on the American side.
It's an important thing to think about as we start planning our own domestic big reopening here, with Tenet coming to the domestic market this weekend. And of course, in anticipation of that, we have big news coming from the state of California. Rebecca, there's word of updates in terms of when movie theaters in the state can reopen.
Yeah, it is news. It's yet to be seen how big the news is in practical terms. So basically what happened is that California's governor released his blueprint for a safer economy plan, which has a whole bunch of details on a whole bunch of different industries. But as it relates to movie theaters, long and the short of it is that some counties technically, as of Monday, the 31st, can open movie theaters at 25% capacity. The basic idea is that every county in California has been organized into 4 tiers. Most of them are in the worst tier. That includes Los Angeles County. There are some counties, including San Diego County, San Francisco County, that have gone down in terms of cases, in terms of positivity rates of COVID testing. So, theaters, as far as the information that we've been able to see, have not actually started reopening in California yet, which makes sense because if any had opened on August 31st, they would have had, I think, 3 days notice to pull it off. So not really surprised that no one jumped on that. But there is a corridor for reopening. There's a plan for reopening. There are benchmarks that counties have to hit, and there are benchmarks that they have to follow in terms of a percentage of capacity that they're allowed to have once they reopen. The real question now is, okay, the major exhibitors who operate in California, your AMC, your Regal, your Cinemark, are they going to open, or are they going to take it in a county by county basis? Are they going to wait until they can open in most of California at the same time? Are they maybe going to wait for Los Angeles or Los Angeles County? That's something that we're going to have to wait and see. A lot of the counties that technically can have movie theaters open are in Northern California. So I would be interested to see if we start seeing showtimes there. But we saw something similar in all the way back in June, where there was an announcement that, California theaters in theory can open as soon as, I think it was June 12th at the time. Obviously that didn't really happen. There's sensitivity to it, certainly, in terms of you don't want to reopen and then have to reclose. You don't maybe necessarily want to take it piecemeal county by county. You would want to have a more unified campaign, a more unified effort, especially in a market so large and so important to the industry as California. But we'll see. Certainly, things have more momentum now than they did in June, with Tenet coming out over Labor Day weekend, with other films already coming to theaters, and with hundreds of theaters in the United States outside of California already having opened their doors. So nothing similar for New York yet. We're waiting on that one.
We're still waiting on that one. I know that our industry colleague, Joe Masher, who is on the board of the NATO group here in New York, has been actively campaigning to get a little bit more clarity. But as it stands, as Rebecca notes, we've got about 62% more or less of the domestic market in terms of grossing potential available to distributors. That in itself is going to have a lot to say in terms of what these opening weekend grosses and these weekly box office figures are going to come in at. Beyond that 62% that's open, we also have to factor in what's in the market, what isn't in the market yet, and are enough people ready to come back right at the beginning. It's a big concern, but I think a lot of distributors and exhibitors are keenly aware of it, right? I think a lot of the reopening campaign hasn't really been focused on, hey, let's come back as soon as possible. It's really been when you're comfortable to come back, here's how we're going to be waiting for you. So it's going to be interesting to track that. I know after speaking with Kathleen Taft, the president of distribution over at Disney over the weekend, Disney is still waiting to see just what these major circuit reopening plans are going to be in the state of California, and really take it day by day. So it's not a guarantee that we'll see a huge location count increase for a title like New Mutants in its second weekend. Of course, New Mutants being the first wide release of a major studio here domestically, opening to $7 million over the weekend. And to be frank, guys, that's more or less square with our expectations for the title. We expected the title to open with 7.5 million ahead of release. It really is within that range. To give you some context, before the pandemic, we were looking at around a $17 million opening weekend. That means everything said and done, going down to 7 million, looking at that grossing potential, looking at the audiences that are comfortable coming back, it really is performing among expectations. And those expectations are, of course, very much recalibrated in this post-pandemic context.
And as we've discussed before, it's definitely not all about the opening weekend right now. I mean, we have films coming out in the coming months, but certainly in terms of numbers, nowhere close to the amount that we would have seen. So there's a definite potential. I mean, maybe people just aren't comfortable going opening week. Maybe people just think, oh, it's going to be too busy. And then 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, into the future, people will get more comfortable with the idea of going back to the theater, and in theaters with, multiplexes with 10, 11, 12 screens, New Mutants will still be there because there's not going to be much else to program, even over the next month or two.
I can't really see this happening, but I'm wondering if either of you could... if either of you think that we might see a movie actually have a second or third weekend that's better than its opening weekend sometime in the next month or two.
It's all down to location counts, obviously. It's a little bit like any retail thing. The more shelves you can have the product in, the easier it is to get that happening. We're all just learning on a week by week basis to see how this happens. I think a title like The New Mutants, which, let's face it, isn't maybe a premium Disney title, I think is fair to say. It's a title that came from an acquisition that was originally supposed to come out April 2018, was shelved for 2.5 years. So I think that's obviously a different sort of conversation than we would something like a Tenet or a Wonder Woman. I think there's still a lot of lessons to be learned, but we're seeing signs that some folks aren't too keen to be the first to find out how this new normal works.
Paramount has been, as of this recording, the most recent studio to mostly vacate 2020. Snake Eyes was scheduled for October, and now they're October next year. Clifford the Big Red Dog, obviously a family title. Previously, it was going to come out November 13th, 2020, and is now November 5th, 2021. Nothing particularly unexpected there. They hadn't really ramped up marketing or really done much of any marketing for either of those titles.
Yeah, the Snake Eyes trailer was originally planned for CinemaCon. Obviously, with CinemaCon not happening, that changed, and it just seems like Paramount kept holding the cards on that one. And
good card reading. Good pun.
But that movie stars Henry Golding, breakout star of Crazy Rich Asians, and so there's every reason, I think, for Paramount to think that they've got a solid performer on their hands with Snake Eyes, just based on his casting alone. So. Actually, to me, it suggests some confidence in the movie that they decided to hold it for a year rather than just dropping it without much fanfare.
New Mutants sing it. And at this point, I mean, there have been some other shifts, mostly relating to their 2021 and 2022 lineups. But as of this point, the only release that Paramount has on the calendar is their December release of Coming to America, the Coming to America sequel. It's the number 2. Saying those two titles out loud, you cannot distinguish between them.
Right.
But the Coming to America sequel is Paramount's next release. So, I mean, at this point, they're able to really kind of focus on something that's not coming out until December in terms of marketing. It's a known property. It's known stars. Eddie Murphy, certainly with Dolomite Is My Name. I mean, people still love Eddie Murphy for good reasons. And it's not something like Snake Eyes or Clifford the Big Red Dog where, Henry Golding, he's a big star. He's an up and coming star, but you still kind of have to sell people on, there's another G.I. Joe movie. Oh yeah, Henry Golding was that guy I liked in Crazy Rich Asians.
Right.
I feel like Coming to America is definitely an easier sell, and maybe that's the thought, is that Paramount can kind of put all their efforts on that horse and take other things that they might have to put more work on.
Coming to America is the same director as Dolomite Is My Name as well, Craig Brewer. And he and Eddie Murphy obviously, generated a pretty good working relationship on Dolomite. So it makes sense that they've gone forward into this movie. And a lot of the audience that Paramount needs to remember the original Coming to America is going to remember it without too much effort. Not going to be a whole lot required.
Oh, it's a personal favorite on my end. I'm a big fan. We should clarify. We should call this one "Two Coming to America," just so it's simpler for us. It rolls off.
This is a note to anyone at Paramount who's listening.
Yeah. Exactly. So, okay, with those Paramount movements, we've got things happening at the box office domestically. We've talked about Tenet overseas. We also had the return of the specialty market this year with the personal history of David Copperfield, which Searchlight Pictures put out. And how did that go?
So the personal history of David Copperfield was released on 1,360 screens for a cumulative gross of $475K over the weekend. It's the first specialty title to come out since the COVID shutdown. I spoke to director Armando Iannucci for our August issue. He's the director behind Veep, is probably his most prominent title to U.S. audiences. And he told me that Searchlight told him that a lot of specialty art house independent theaters were really looking forward to having a film to screen again, specifically looking forward to that film, looking forward to a Searchlight release. And he was very measured when I asked him about, is this ever a film that would have gone to PVOD? Searchlight Pictures, as we know, has been really committed to the theatrical market. Speaking from his point of view of the director of the film, he said, I want it to be able to come out theatrically in a way that is safe. I don't want people to risk their lives to see this movie. At the same time, just speaking my own personal opinion here, it's a very, very wonderfully, beautifully staged, colorful film, and it's one that I personally am very glad that I saw on the big screen before all this went down. That is one, Russ, that I wonder, I'm more interested in the holds over the coming weeks for that one, because it is a sort of film that kind of, no one's rushing out on the first weekend. Oh my God, I have to see another Charles Dickens adaptation. No offense to Charles Dickens, but it is a word of mouth kind of movie. We clearly have different friends.
I think too, as people understand, this is from the person who made In the Loop and the person who made Veep, which is an amazing show. Mm-hmm. That as that understanding starts to filter through, maybe some of the audience that thinks, do I need to see a Charles Dickens movie, might think, oh wow, I do want to see a new movie from the person who made Veep.
Mm-hmm. And once the word of mouth gets out that this movie is really funny, it's a heartening movie, it's kind of a feel-good movie. It definitely doesn't have that sort of fusty, musty aura that I think period dramas are often somewhat unfairly labeled with. So that's one, the box office life of this movie I'm definitely interested in seeing, and I'm glad that it's available for people to see it in theaters.
It's interesting you bring up that factor of word of mouth, because right now in this recovery effort, the word of mouth is going to be two-pronged. One is, did you like the movie? And two is going to be, how did you feel in the movie theater? And that's something that we've said time and time again here on the podcast in the past, is that it's going to take hearing experiences from people that they trust, people in their social circles, to really reassure some of the folks that are concerned to go back. I think a lot of businesses, a lot of cinemas have worked very hard to put in these policies in place. What your cousin or what your friend or what your partner might say about their trip to the cinema, I think that's really going to influence an uptick down the road when it comes to that box office recovery. Real quick, we had the opportunity to speak with Frank Rodriguez, the head of distribution over at Searchlight, on Sunday, as we're reporting the box office totals there. An interesting thing he told me, guys, was that, yes, they were completely committed to theatrical. It's one of the reasons why, as a specialty player, they didn't go into that PVOD space during the closures the way other competitors like A24 with First Cow or with a number of titles from Focus did. They really wanted to have a title there for the reopening, but they did have an unexpected increase in location counts, because according to Frank Rodriguez, a number of the majors, say the AMCs, the Cinemarks, the Regals that are already open, probably gave them a couple of more runs than they otherwise would have, because the screen is available, especially right now before the Tenet opening. So they did see that sort of slightly wider push. They saw great progress in markets that they don't traditionally associate with specialty titles. So some of the markets that did particularly well with this title include Dallas, Texas, Orlando, Florida, cities in Tennessee like Knoxville and Nashville. And that's always good to see, right? When you have these sort of titles that we usually associate with their platform releases in the coasts do well in parts of the country that they might not have the release that we'd all hope for.
And it's better in the sense that the 25%, 50% capacity limitations that some of these theaters have, it's not going to come into play so much when it's a huge megaplex AMC. You're getting everybody in there maybe who would have wanted to buy a ticket for a more specialty limited title. Whereas with a smaller theater, maybe you're going to have to turn people away. One of the upcoming titles that Searchlight appears to be really excited about is Nomad Land from director Chloe Zhao. She directed The Rider, which was very well received on the critic circuit and in the festival circuit a few years back. She's already been tapped to direct an upcoming MCU title. And her next one is Nomad Land, which actually is getting a bow on the festival circuit, even though you might not be thinking the festival circuit's happening this year, but it's happening.
Whether we'll be able to cover it is another question, apparently.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is having a simultaneous premiere on September 11th at the Venice International Film Festival and the Toronto International Film Festival, both of which are actually having physical film festivals. Toronto's doing a mix between in-person and digital, and it's definitely smaller than it's been in years past. I think they're only doing 50 titles. But yeah, it's having a simultaneous premiere at those two festivals with, Zhao kind of coming in virtually along with star and producer Frances McDormand. And then the next day, Telluride, which is a really big indicator and an important player in the awards season, it's not having an in-person edition, but it's having this special Telluride from Los Angeles drive-in thing, where they're able just specifically to screen this film in drive-ins in Los Angeles, hopefully getting some of that essential buzz to get butts and seats when the film comes out in theaters, which it is scheduled to do in December. So it's weird to see that a repetition of the very normal film hits the festival circuit, and then it has a theatrical release a few months later. But Searchlight is committed to that with Nomad Land, and I'm really excited to see the film and to see how that shakes out for them. What does award season, what does festival season look like this year?
Right. Yeah, it's weird. And I guess there are a couple of prongs to consider there. One of those prongs is not applicable for this movie because it's the interaction between festival season and distribution pickups. Obviously, Searchlight already has Nomad Land, so that movie doesn't need to be bought. So you wonder about some of the movies that were completed that, did not get to debut at the Cannes Festival, that didn't happen, that didn't get to debut at other festivals that didn't happen. There's a certain amount of product, for lack of a better word, sitting on shelves without distribution yet. And I wonder if this festival season will adjust the future for any of those movies. And then obviously there's the question of festival season as it relates to awards, and awards as that relates to promotion of movies. There's a lot of money that's put into award season promotion, but we don't know what any of that stuff is going to look like yet. And I don't know, to me it seems kind of weird to have an award season when there hasn't been much of a year for distribution overall. And so by the time we get to, let's say these festivals happen, a couple of movies end up being breakouts, how many people are going to be able to see those movies before the awards season really comes around? There are always complaints that people haven't been able to see the awards movies before the awards really take place. This year, it seems like that might be more pointed criticism than ever.
Especially with getting critics to see these films. I mean, you see studios kind of gradually figuring out the process of sending online screeners to press, and there's some bumps along the road so far. Let me just say that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. What are we? Best Picture winner, Bad Boys for Life? I don't. It seems like if anything, a much smaller award show. I mean, definitely in terms of the physical scope of it, obviously, but also in terms of how many films can you really...
Hey, look, you know what? We're still getting Denis Villeneuve's Dune at the end of December. And as far as I'm concerned, I haven't seen the movie. It can sweep the Oscars. Let's go. Let's do an all Dune Oscars.
I think that's probably the most anticipated film for this podcast.
Certainly for me. Certainly for me. But it's a good question. I don't know how that works. And I think it's a question that a lot of people, certainly on the critic side and on the distribution side, wonder about. And to a certain degree, that somebody's just kind of got to brute force the issue and, get the movies out there and see what happens.
Because on the one side, you have, potentially you could have a full Oscars season of the films that have come out, and you would finally get some, major awards, Oscar appreciation for some of the smaller films that maybe flew under the radar.
Well, the other question is, Pixar's Soul comes out in November. I haven't seen the movie. I've seen as much of it as anyone else has, possibly even less. But let's say Soul is just terrific. Let's say Soul is one of the great Pixar movies. Pixar has been edging closer and closer towards that Best Picture category for some time. This seems like a year where maybe a movie like Soul has a shot at Best Picture that otherwise it doesn't have. I don't know how that works.
I think that's a really good point, because looking back at what this year has brought in terms of movies, it's something that we've touched upon in the past, but maybe it's worth discussing a little bit more in detail now. What movies have really broken through the cultural conversation in 2020 as a whole? Of course, with the return of new releases, hopefully we'll have more titles to have a conversation about. But really, what are the titles that your parents have heard about, or that your friends that aren't in the industry are talking about?
Well, let me start to answer that question. In our news recap earlier, because it wasn't exactly box office news, we didn't talk about the shocking death of actor Chadwick Boseman, who passed on Friday after a 4-year battle with colon cancer, a colon cancer that no one outside of his family and probably some of his close colleagues and friends knew that he had. And so that has caused sort of a surge of appreciation for his work and grief over his passing. Someone who, thanks to his role as Black Panther, meant a lot to a huge number of people, who had never seen a superhero like Black Panther on the big screen before. Earlier this year, he was in Da 5 Bloods, which was the new Spike Lee movie, which was a Netflix release. But that, I think, Boseman's passing has brought that movie back up into the conversation a little bit. And I feel like after everything is said and done, that's maybe a movie that's going to stick around as a conversation piece. And depending on where things go with eligibility, it could also be one that ends up being a player come awards season. In that Boseman plays a character who is sort of this seen in flashbacks by the surviving primary characters who had served with him in Vietnam. And he plays a character that, now that we know that Boseman was suffering from a terminal cancer when he performed the role, has even more resonance than it had in the original film. So that is certainly one answer for me. And I'm curious to see, how that movie sticks around as people continue to talk about Boseman's work.
The only other one that I've really seen, an extended conversation on, honestly, is Hamilton dropping on Disney Plus. That was something that already had a huge public consciousness to it. People were already waiting for it, waiting to see it. And I saw, some discussion that happened specifically about the ending that kind of went on for a little bit. Other than that, it's just kind of been something comes out and people talk about it for a few days, and then it's just, time has no meaning this year anyways.
Right.
It's hard to have that sticking power, right?
The only other one I'm seeing is Host, which is a film that it premiered on Shudder, the horror streaming site, and that one was actually a horror film that was shot, it was shot on Zoom. It's the premise of the film is that the cast
is produced during
stuck in
quarantine.
Yeah. And I think definitely that hook helped it, have some staying power and have some ability to cut through the noise. Certainly the fact that it's a good film helped, but speaking to what you said, Daniel, I don't know if that's really made much of an impact outside of horror people.
In my little corner, I think Yeah, Hamilton, I think, has been really the one title. And I think when we look back on 2020 and things that went to VOD, Hamilton's going to be the one that hurt the most. We've talked about it in the past. Losing Mulan was a big deal, I think, for exhibition. But when we look at like box office grossing potential, of course, worldwide, I don't think it really has too much of a
no one cares about the American founding fathers outside of America. What?
Especially if you wrap your way through it. I'm sorry, even on a personal level. I think when my father visited us here in New York one year, he asked me why there was a musical about the Formula One race car driver Lewis Hamilton. I had to, clarify for him that no, this was a political figure in the United States. But I still think domestically that one had huge box office grossing potential. I do think more than Mulan did, more than Trolls World Tour. So that's going to be the one that when we look back, I think on this year, it did create a splash. It did have staying power in a national conversation, and very few other things have. I think the stay-at-home mode of viewing films is more conducive in terms of the conversation to that serial format that we're seeing with a lot of originals from Netflix and Hulu, for example. Obviously, Tiger King, I think, had a big part of the cultural conversation right at the beginning of COVID-19 closures here in the US. And also the Last Dance documentary on ESPN about Michael Jordan. I think those two docuseries, just by their nature, had this conversation power, but I'm not sure if I would include them in the whole cinema category. I think it's a little bit of a stretch to have that.
What I would say as far as things that did open theatrically is, two movies that were, I think, better than anyone expected, and which consequently have had some staying power, and which I think would have had more power with a longer theatrical window, are the aforementioned Bad Boys for Life and Universal's The Invisible Man, which is really a terrific movie. Mm-hmm. Like brutally straightforward, but very effectively made, really entertaining and actually scary. And that movie had some good life, and unfortunately it hit just before COVID really locked everything down. And I think that had The Invisible Man had the opportunity to have a better theatrical run, it would probably have stuck around. Now, of course, if Universal wants to, if they drop The Invisible Man back into theaters in October, I think there's every reason to think that that could perform again, because now people know what it is. And if nothing else, that's a movie that could do well as a rep circuit, or even, an October re-release in years to come.
Double feature that with Candyman.
Well, that's the thing. Ooh. Candyman's the other movie that seems like it has the big opportunity to really be a cultural powerhouse once it arrives in October, assuming that it does. So I think we're all curious to see how that one turns out.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities, as you guys mentioned, in seeing what movies that had a curtailed theatrical run end up sneaking their way back to theaters, especially with not that many new wide releases coming out in the coming weeks. We had expected a title like The Kingsman, for example, to come out in mid-September from Disney. That's off the schedule now. So to get a better idea and a clearer picture of what we've got ahead of us, not only this weekend with the release domestically of Tenet, but also in 2020 as a whole, let's welcome in our dear colleague, Shawn Robbins, chief analyst here at Box Office Pro, to walk us through what we can expect from this weekend's Tenet release and what's coming up after.
Hey, Daniel, thanks. It's good to be back. Good to talk some good news for a change.
And it is good news because it's hard to sort of figure out what these numbers mean. I mean, we were chatting here earlier on these international figures from opening weekend. What's your take on that 53.6 million opening weekend overseas for Tenet?
Yeah, I think at this point, we're kind of reinforcing this notion that let's look at these results in a few weeks, even a month from now, and kind of start to determine success on that. But there's really no getting around the fact this outperformed pretty much any projection ahead of release. So it's hard to see it as anything but positive. And, we're seeing several markets where it's being directly compared to the numbers of Dunkirk and Interstellar, and it not being very far behind those films. In very select cases, performing very close to the averages. IMAX in particular has been a strong driver. So it's This is really you couldn't have asked for much more, I don't think.
And it's interesting because we also have to factor in the good with the bad, right? So
Right.
the bad is there's a pandemic. People, not everybody wants to come back. The good thing is it's easy to read too much into these numbers sometimes because there is an unparalleled pent up demand that I don't think we've ever seen in the market, especially looking at something, let's say domestically, like New Mutants opening to 7 million. Something that Russ had mentioned earlier on the podcast was, could we see a title like that have a bigger week 2 or week 3 gross after an opening weekend? Do you foresee those scenarios happening in the domestic market?
I think it's still a little hard to tell, but it's absolutely possible. And it will depend on the movie. I think with New Mutants, there were a lot of factors with that film, even before the pandemic. I mean, it had been delayed multiple times and it was naturally fan driven. And it kind of performed that way in its first couple of days domestically. But that's when we talk about Tenet, and I think some of the other films coming out over the next couple of months, they'll be in very different situations. And it really is, it's going to be all about those main elements of they will have screens longer. The natural tendency of people to come back to theaters, even in markets that are open, is going to be staggered. I mean, you're going to have people that want to play this more cautiously. And even if cases are down in their area, theaters are open for a couple of weeks and, things are going well, it's natural for people that want to be cautious. And that's, I think that's something that everybody can respect. There are a lot of people who want to go back now, and we're kind of seeing that. And I think we will see that with Tenet, but that's why any figures that we see are just not going to have any point of comparison, and we kind of have to take them on their own terms.
We always take studio reporting here with a grain of salt. I think in the coming weeks, we're going to have to need a bucket of salt to basically, cut through what is the good news, what is the bad news. But with that in mind, Shawn, what can we expect from this weekend's domestic opening of Tenet? What scenarios are in your mind?
Right. Well, I think we can talk about a lot of different scenarios. I think the most likely right now is kind of looking at this from the perspective of we have these sneak previews for 3 days leading into a Thursday nationwide release that will still be missing several major markets. So you really could not have a more non-traditional opening for a major film in the United States, especially going into Labor Day weekend. So you essentially have this 4-day weekend. You essentially have an 8-day opening for the film. But I think it's fair to look, if you want to break it down to that specific Friday to Sunday traditional weekends, just look at it normally, even Friday through Monday. There are going to be a lot of different patterns going on here, but with Nolan's following and the pre-sales we're seeing, I think it's fair to say that, we could see an overall first week maybe hit 35 to 40 million, possibly a little higher, especially with overseas results being what they are. And the fact that we're hearing some good news out of several other states that are hoping to try and get back up and running in time for this weekend. So, but again, this is all about the long-term play. And even if it can hit that number, the higher it goes, maybe that's going to translate to I would hesitate to call it being more front loaded, but the higher it does open, maybe the more normal it can play. But it, by nature, as a Nolan film, his films tend to play for a long time anyway. And on average, I think close to 3 months, if not longer, is probably the minimum we could expect for this to be playing in some major theaters. So regardless of what we see happen this weekend, I don't think the whole story is going to be told for weeks, if not a month or two to come.
Of course, yeah. No, and anecdotally, speaking with friends that are outside of the industry, reassuring them on what the industry is doing to make this as low risk as possible. A lot of folks I know are saying, "Hey, I can't wait to see it at a Tuesday morning sometime in early October." And I think that's going to be the case for a number of viewers. So I think I agree. It's going to be a number of weeks until we really have a good perspective of what that theatrical run looks like. Talking about theatrical runs, obviously there's a lot to look at for the rest of the year. There's been some calendar changes with Paramount and Disney clearing up some dates in 2020. What's it looking like right now on the schedule for the remainder of the year?
So at this point, I think it's natural to be spooked by any release delay because we're triggered by it at this point after months of it and just kind of this constant concern about what that means for exhibition. But I think the perspective here, especially with Paramount's delays, has been the fact that we'll start with Disney with moving the Kingsman. It was really in no man's land. It was opening 2 weeks after Tenet and 2 weeks before Wonder Woman, which leaves it really not much space to breathe. And given what we generally know about Warner Brothers' contractual agreements for keeping Tenet on the biggest and best screens, even if Kingsman had opened, it would probably be playing in these smaller auditoriums where it's even harder to social distance and you're not getting the greatest image and sound quality. So it makes a lot of sense for them to delay it into February from that perspective. In looking at Paramount, I think there was always a question about Clifford and Snake Eyes because they most likely haven't even finished production. So granted, while there is this concern about having too many films in the market and just playing it safe, I think there's also that practical thing to keep in mind of if these films are even ready. And there are still 1 or 2 films that are on the slate for later in the year that you can ask that question about. But I think those in particular, especially for an animated title like Clifford, it was just kind of seeming obvious that they wouldn't want to keep that on the calendar. And even if it were finished, it would have been going up against a Pixar movie and the first animated movie in over half a year. So it's just, a risk not worth taking.
Yeah, it looked like a very difficult corridor and competitive corridor for multiple releases to share the spotlight. Shawn, thanks so much for joining us. And for our listeners at home, you can read our final box office forecast for that domestic opening weekend of Tenet at boxofficepro.com.
Well, thanks, Shawn, for that. Excited to see how this weekend works out. And thanks to Daniel and Rebecca for all of their insights and contributions once again. We will see you next Thursday on our new schedule. Please join us. The Box Office Podcast is produced by Caitlin Kehoe and recordeditpodcast.com. This episode was written by Daniel Laria and Rebecca Polly and narrated by Daniel, Rebecca, Shawn Robbins, and me, Russ Fisher. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next week.